Hello everyone and welcome to a video that I've been meaning to do for a very long time, one talking about what I consider to be the best fights in Jujutsu Kaisen. Before I get into this video, I do have to give a spoiler warning for anime onlys. Most of the fights I'm going to be talking about in this video will not appear until at least Season 2, so either come back in like 2 years once Season 2 is over, or read the manga and come back. Otherwise, if you have read the manga or you just don't care about spoilers, let's get on with the video. I had originally wanted this to be a top 10 video, but I had a very hard time sort of organizing a list beneath the top 5, so instead I'm going to include what is essentially fights number 10 through 6 as the honorable mentions. I'm going to go over them very quickly, not give too much detail, just give my general thoughts on them, and then we'll get on to the more detailed top 5 list. Yuji and Nanami versus Mahito does a really good job showing off all of the creative possibilities that we have with Mahito's transfiguration ability. It has Nanami's backstory, which is just amazingly written, and has made him, to this day, probably my favorite character in the entirety of Jujutsu Kaisen, and it establishes the conflict between Yuji and Mahito that has been going on in the story ever since this fight started. Megumi vs. the Cursed Womb Spirit finally gives us some payoff from when Sukuna suggested that Megumi has the potential to defeat special grades. We get the reveal of Megumi's domain expansion Chimera Shadow Garden, which, other than having an awesome name, just looks amazing. And in general, we just sort of finally get to see the fruits of Megumi's training that we didn't get to see while we were busy focusing on Yuji and Nanami. Gojo vs. the Special Grades in Shibuya does an amazing job of showing off why Gojo is truly the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer alive. Even without his constantly activated Infinity technique, he is an absolute force of nature who terrifies special grades. These cursed spirits, who are essentially horror movie monsters, are terrified by Gojo. If anything, he seems like more of a monster than they do during this fight. Mekamaru vs. Mahito gets a lot of points from me just for creativity. We already have the almost limitless possibilities that come from Mahito's idle transfiguration, and then you have Mekamaru pull a fucking Eva unit out of nowhere. I mean, seriously, I had never expected this magic fighting battle shonen to give me a mecha fight out of nowhere, but they did. In addition to that, the conclusion of this fight also gives us even more reason to hate Mahito, which is very important when it comes to one of the fights I have later on this list. And the last of my honorable mentions is Yuji and Nobara versus Eso and Kechizu. As with the Megumi versus the Cursed Womb Spirit fight, we get to see the fruits of Nobara's training while we were busy focusing on Yuji and Nanami. Her and Megumi really did not do a lot in the story after the Cursed Womb arc. Didn't even do too much in the Goodwill event, especially in comparison to characters like Yuji and Todo. But with this fight, we finally get to see what Nobara can do. Along with that, we just get to see her teamwork with Yuji, both of them using Black Flash, and the emotional consequences of this fight are just really good. Now, with that, let's get on to the real list. Starting off in the number 5 spot, we have Gojo vs. Toji. This fight is a huge contrast to all of the previous fights we'd seen with Gojo, and pretty much everything we see from him after the fact, and that Gojo is really the underdog for the first half of this fight. He's exhausted, he's fighting an opponent who he can't detect, he can't see them with the 6 eyes. It's the first time we've ever seen Gojo really be at a disadvantage, and that's for a number of reasons. A big one just sort of being Toji. Toji is one of those I can beat anyone with prep time characters. He's a lot like Batman. He even has the same sort of violent viciousness that Batman has when he incapacitates people, but the difference with Toji is that he actively tries to kill people, and by God, is it fun seeing him try to do it. Most of the fights in Jujutsu revolve around some sort of magical techniques using cursed energy. Toji is not like that, because Toji has no cursed techniques, and instead he just has sheer physical prowess and cursed tools, and boy is it fun to see Toji fight with cursed tools. He is just such a good time to watch fight, especially against Gojo, who has such amazing abilities, and a lot of those really cool abilities are translated into some fantastic creative paneling. I'd say the biggest example of that would be the end of the fight when Gojo uses Hollow Technique Purple, just the way Gege does that double page spread with the text bubble covering where Toji is hit by the attack. It's just fantastic. And the way it ends with Toji thinking, just sort of having his internal monologue about how he had been lying to himself and how he thought he didn't care about his own pride. It's just all some really, really good stuff. And it was a perfect way to sort of have the climax of the Hidden Inventory arc, which was already amazing in the first place, and this fight just served to make it even better. In the number 4 spot, I have the Zenin team versus Dagon. As we'd learned very early on in the series, it's very common for Jujutsu sorcerers to go up against cursed spirits who are way above their level, and we see that here with a bunch of grade 1 sorcerers fighting against a special grade. And not just any special grade, but a disaster spirit, who, as we've seen, are much more powerful than our average run-of-the-mill special grades. So, what do they do in this situation? Well, for the most part, they have to rely a lot on teamwork and using their Jujutsu techniques together to most effectively attack the cursed spirit. And we get a lot, and I mean a lot, of awesome examples of that, mostly coming from Naobito's technique, which for some reason took me a really long time to figure out how it worked. I don't know, the explanation for it was just, really convoluted. But we get to see a lot of cool shit with that. We get to see Nanami and Maki fight, which is always a fun time. One of my favorite things about this fight is the use of domain expansions. One of the best things about domain expansions is you pretty much just have a instant change in environment regardless of wherever the fight is happening. And we get that with Dagon's domain expansion, which is really, really visually stunning. It's just a beautiful, it's a tropical beach setting. And we get to see them fight a bunch of demon fish, or mostly just get eat by giant demon fish, but regardless, it's just really awesome. Basically, at this point in the fight, it's what happens when the gang gets caught in a domain expansion? Well, mostly a lot of bad stuff happens. We see what happens when sorcerers don't have a means to counteract the guaranteed hit attacks of domains. We see what happens when they do have a way to do that, such as with Naobito. We see how the domain caster responds to those, and we see what happens when you have a domain tug-of-war with Megumi coming in with his use of Chimera Shadow Garden. And to top it all off, we get Toji in another fight. Basically, the same reasons Toji was so awesome to have in the fight against Gojo, but now we see how he fares against a special grade, and you come to realize just how useful it would have been for Toji to remain on the side of the Jujutsu sorcerers, but regardless, he comes in as this wild card and just absolutely annihilates Dagon. This fight from start to finish is just amazing. You have the constant raising of stakes, the dynamic changes of the environments, and the introduction of the wild card known as Toji. It's, all in all, just a really fun read, no matter how many times I go back over it. In the number 3 spot, I have Yuji and Todo versus Hanami. This fight is one of my favorites for a few simple reasons. The first one is the chemistry between Yuji and Todo. Todo is just such a fun character. He's one of my personal favorites. I still need to do a video on him. That'll be coming sometime in the future. And the way he interacts with Yuji is it's just such a sight to behold. It's just wonderful the way that he encourages him, the way he wants him to do better. It's just fantastic. And the fact that they literally just met 10 minutes ago, that just makes it even better. We also have the amazing choreography that comes from Todo's curse technique, Boogie Woogie. Being able to swap places with someone with a clap of the hands is very simple, but as we see with Todo, it can be very dangerous for the people it's being used on. And boy, oh boy, does the ability to switch give us a lot of fantastic opportunities for the choreography. And not only that, it's the fact that Todo can very easily feint people out by just clapping his hands but not switching with them. The use of Boogie Woogie also shows the amount of trust between Yuji and Todo that has developed in 10 minutes since them meeting, and that Yuji can seemingly predict when Todo will and when he will not switch places with him. It's just absolutely fantastic. And we of course have the introduction of Black Flesh, which has become extremely important ever since its introduction. It adds a very dynamic element to the fights and to the power system, and really just helps to show how much Yuji has grown since the start of the series, and how much more room he has to grow from here. In the number 2 spot, I have Yuji, Nobara, and Todo versus Mahito, the most recent fight to be concluded in the manga, and I also believe the longest fight in the manga. The Shibuya incident is already the longest arc we've had so far, and with this fight essentially serving as the climax, it is the longest we've seen. I believe it's about 12 chapters in length, which is longer than an entire volume of the manga, so it's quite lengthy, and as a result, we get a lot of content out of it. First, it starts off with Mahito killing Nanami, which is sort of the resolution to the pseudo-rivalry that was established between them as soon as Nanami first encountered Mahito in the sewers. We also get more reason for us to want Yuji to beat Mahito. In case you haven't noticed, Mahito is responsible for most of the major character deaths in the series. He killed Junpei, he killed Mekamaru, and now he's killed Nanami. And this streak of Mahito causing us immense emotional pain continues during this fight, with him seemingly almost killing Nobara, with him forcing Todo to cut his own hand off, which effectively eliminates his own curse technique, at least the primary usage of it. As the fight goes on, Mahito causes more and more pain, and we have all the more reason to want Yuji to defeat Mahito. In addition to that, Mahito becomes more and more powerful as the fight goes on. We see him use a number of new abilities that we've never seen him use before. We see him turn people into weapons. We see a new version of Soul Multiplicity with Polymorphic Soul Isomer. We see Mahito use Black Flash, which is the first time we've ever seen a Curse Spirit use it, and as we know, Black Flash is extremely important to the growth of a sorcerer, and in this situation is very important to Mahito's growth, because it allows him to use a 0.2 second domain expansion, something he had only seen Gojo use for less than a second, and of course, it allows him to realize the true form of his soul with Instant Spirit Body of Distorted Killing. Mahito was already an absolute menace, and he becomes even more of one during this fight. Another thing I like is the constant escalation of stakes, with more characters being introduced into the fray. You of course have more people that Mahito could potentially kill, and of course Mahito getting more and more powerful as it goes on. It seems less and less likely that Yuji will be able to beat Mahito. You also have the changing in environment, with them going around inside the subway, to them breaking off into the surface, to then smashing back down into the ground partially. That's another thing that I mentioned liking a lot with domain expansions, and we sort of get that in this fight without domain expansions, just because of how much mobility the fighters involved in this fight have. And of course, my favorite part is the conclusion of this fight. If you watched my live reaction review for Chapter 132, you know that I'm very pleased with the way this fight has seemingly ended, with Yuji not only physically defeating Mahito, but also mentally defeating Mahito, acknowledging that they're the same, but that doesn't matter. Yuji doesn't need a reason to fight Mahito, he's just going to kill him, and he'll kill him again and again as many times as he has to, because that's just his role in all of this. Which, of course, is sort of the culmination of what seems like the purpose of Shibuya, which is for Yuji to come to understand his role as a Jujutsu sorcerer. All of that is culminated in this fight, and along with that, I finally get to see that punk bitch Mahito put in his place. After all of the terrible stuff he's done with a smug look, it's so great to see Mahito finally running away like a little animal, scared out of his mind by Yuji. It's just so good. And finally, in the number 1 spot, I'm sure, not very surprising to some of you, I have Yuji versus Chozo. The primary reason I consider this to be the best fight in the series is this fight has perfect flow. Every action has a reaction to it. Everything that one of the fighters does, the other fighter does something in response to it, and it just sort of keeps going on and on like that. It's just fantastic. You have Yuji getting hit by Convergence, and then learning how to adapt to it. Then you have him getting hit by Supernova. You have the introduction of Mekamaru and his plan. You go into the bathroom, which is where we get the really, really great stuff with this fight. I mean, just with the water gushing out of the sinks and toilets and the sprinklers on the ceilings. it almost seems like an action movie. Like, almost every action movie that I can think of, a lot of spy action movies actually, have some kind of bathroom fight scene, and I can see this fight moving in my head with the water gushing out everywhere, and the two of them fighting each other. It's just fantastic. Another thing I love is that both fighters make mistakes, and both of them have to adapt to their own mistakes. You have Yuji not knowing about supernova, you have Chozo not understanding why he can't manipulate blood outside of his body when it's exposed to water, you have Yuji getting shot through the liver, Chozo choosing to harden the blood in his arm despite the risk of thrombosis, which is just... that's just another thing. If you want to hype someone up, say that a person considers them to be a more immediate threat to their life than developing fucking thrombosis in their arm. That's how you hype someone up. Yeah, it's just fucking fantastic. I mean, it's almost hard for me to explain. It's so simple, but it's just so fucking good. So with that is my conclusion for this list. What are your favorite fights in the series? Please let me know in the comments. This is, of course, a purely subjective list. These are mostly just here based on how much I like the fights, really. As I'm sure you could probably tell, some of these I'm not able to give as many reasons for liking them more than others, and that's mostly just because I kind of just like some fights more than others. But yeah, with that, that's really all I have to say for this video. If you enjoyed, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you don't miss any of my uploads. I do Jujutsu Kaisen chapter reactions and reviews every week when a new chapter comes out, so if you're interested in those, you should subscribe so you don't miss any of them. If you enjoy other series such as Record of Ragnarok, Chainsaw Man, and Kengan Omega, I do videos on this series as well, so if you're interested in those, you should definitely check out my channel. My current subscriber goal is to hit 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and we are really close to hitting that, so subscribe, help us reach that milestone, and I'm sure you won't regret it. If you enjoyed discussing Jujutsu Kaisen with other people, or you just enjoy the content I produce on this channel, I highly suggest you check out my Discord server. I have a link to it on my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you around.